distinguished guests, the Honorable Ambassador James Kamonyo, the Honorable UN Assistant Secretary General Clotilde Mabaranga Gasarabwe, members of the Embassy of Rwanda, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Cynthia Akuta, members of the Organizing Committee, all of us, friends. It is my distinct privilege to address you today. 19 years ago, the unspeakable happened. Genocide against Tutsi in Rwanda. 1 million or more people killed in 100 days. Today, the unbelievable has happened. A success story of hope and possibility that continues to amaze the world. These are the bookends of Rwanda's story, from genocide to rebirth, a testimony to the resilience of the Rwandan people. In order to understand where Rwanda is today, acknowledging its many accomplishments, we must also honor the past, which can never be forgotten. The memories of the victims and the stories of survivors provide emotional and historic context to Rwanda's narrative. I was first touched by a survivor's testimony when I was privileged to hear Immaculée Ilibagiza speak in Chicago in January 2011. As she shared her story, hiding from the killers who had annihilated her family and wanted to take her life, I asked myself, how could someone have that much resistance? How does one person move beyond tragedy of such unspeakable proportion? Hearing her strengthened my resolve as I began to work with my co-author and good friend, Andrea Redman, on our book, Rwanda, Inc. For us, the journey to understand Rwanda's past, present, and future began in late 2010, when Andrea first traveled to the country with an organization called Bridge to Rwanda, which fosters education, entrepreneurship, and servant leadership in Rwanda. She came back convinced that there was an incredible story to be told. When I traveled with her for my first time in early 2011, I saw firsthand the transformation that we called the ultimate turnaround. Over the course of researching and writing the book, we made numerous trips to Rwanda, and we spoke with dozens of people in the private sector and in government, including President Paul Kagame and many ministers of government. We learned that Rwanda's comeback was not a rebuilding of what had existed before. Rather, Rwanda was being created anew while drawing upon deep and revered cultural traditions. In President Kagame's words, it was, quote, "It is not about recreation of what used to be, but creation of something that is actually very different and from nothing. It is a story that continues to this day." No one can appreciate the magnitude of this transformation without acknowledging where Rwanda has come from the genocide against Tutsi. We learn the story from so many sources. Ordinary people who were targeted because of the word Tutsi stamped on identity cards, or because of so-called Tutsi looks, or because they were perceived as allies of the Tutsi and therefore disloyal to Rwanda. One survivor in particular was a young man named Serge, who was 13 years old in 1994. He told me of being seeking refuge in a church with his family, but he found no protection there. Instead, he described the torment of waiting, believing it was only a matter of time before he was killed, as the killers gathered people around, and they picked people in front of him and beside him and behind him. Dying, he told us, was preferable to waiting. Today, Serge is a guide officer at the Kigali Memorial Center, and he works there for several reasons, and among them because his father and brother are buried there, and also because he provides personal testimony. And at the end of our conversation, Serge asked me a question. He said, Why didn't your country do anything to stop the genocide? As an American, I was deeply ashamed, and I didn't have an answer for him, except to admit the truth. My country abandoned Rwanda. Looking back, it is very clear that the testimonies that Andrea and I heard as we wrote Rwanda Inc. became a powerful catalyst. We cannot appreciate what has been accomplished in education, in healthcare, in private sector development, or any other area without understanding the complete brokenness and devastation that occurred emotionally, physically, and spiritually. To illustrate this for us, Bishop John Rushahana, who is one of Rwanda's most influential spiritual leaders and head of the country's National Unity and Reconciliation Committee, he gave us a very powerful image. He held a water glass about 3 feet off the ground, and he said, if I drop it from here, it will certainly break, but in fewer and larger pieces than if it drops from a higher level. And then he raised the glass above his head, and he said, the higher up you go with the glass, the more pieces there will be. In this simple illustration, he gave us a tangible example of the magnitude of devastation, a nation shattered in every way. Bishop John also described what he saw when he came to Rwanda from Uganda in July 1994. Scenes so horrific that 4 of the 10 pastors who traveled with him were badly traumatized, and 1 had to be hospitalized. Today, Bishop John sees Rwanda's future as one that is rooted in self-reliance and self-determination. As he explained to us, and as we heard from so many others, Rwanda's post-genocide goals in every area, education, healthcare, private sector development, all of them are interconnected. To be successful, people must have confidence in the government, in each other, and in themselves, and to see their part in it. Rwanda moves forward with a momentum that honors the past, with justice and consequences, and also forgiveness and reconciliation. Within this complexity, special attention must be given to the needs of the survivors. Like you heard this morning, Voices of Rwanda has collected testimonies for more than 7 years. Through careful collecting and archiving of oral histories, Voices of Rwanda amasses a treasury that keeps these voices alive. During our research for Rwanda Inc., we visited a similar organization, Shoah Foundation, and we interviewed Karen Younglot, who is the Director of Research and Documentation, and she acknowledged the balance that Rwanda must achieve to, as she put it, allow survivors to express what they experienced without being forced into reconciliation and forgiveness. Reconciliation is promoted, but is highly personal. Andrea and I heard a very powerful testimony of reconciliation while visiting Gahaya Links, a women's cooperative founded by Joy Ndungutse and her sister Janet. And they did this to help the women of Rwanda by teaching them a cultural tradition of weaving baskets. When the women first came together, the trauma was still very fresh. Some of the women working together were relatives of perpetrators, and others were survivors. How could they go on? And Joy told us this story, that one day, while they were working together, one woman stood up and turned to another woman in the room, and she said, "Today I forgive you. Your husband killed my children." And yet, Rwanda has made reconciliation and unification a national priority, while ensuring that no one forgets the truth about genocide against Tutsi. The Kigali Memorial Center stands as a powerful testimony to that commitment to remember. Andrea and I have both visited the memorial on several occasions, and each time we are deeply moved. On one of my visits to Rwanda nearly 2 years ago, I brought my son Patrick with me. At the Memorial Center, in a darkened room that solemnly displays skulls and bones, Patrick, my son, was overcome with emotion, and I had to take him outside. And he looked at me with tears in his eyes, almost accusingly, and he said, "Mother, This happened in my lifetime. I was born when this happened. Patrick was a baby in Chicago in 1994, and yet the connection was palpable and personal. And I knew he would not be the same. And I am proud to tell you he will return to Rwanda this summer and work on a student documentary film on a rural agricultural project. Today, Rwanda is in an early stage of a new chapter, a period of accelerating economic development, strengthening governance, and achieving gains in healthcare, education, and nutrition. Rwanda's present and its future are byproducts of resilience and a commitment to self-reliance and self-determination. In our book, Andrea and I give many statistics and examples of Rwanda's progress. GDP growth of 8%, universal health care, expansion of compulsory education, gender equality, and more. We saw evidence in the rural areas when we traveled outside of Kigali. In the northern province, just outside of Busanzi, in a little village called Sansu, we were met by children who shook our hands and asked us in English, "What is your name? What is your job?" One little girl, who was about 8 or 9, she's told me without any hesitation that she is going to become a nurse one day. Looking back, this child embodies what is best about the interconnectedness of Rwanda's post-genocide goals. First, she is being educated, as her evidence of her budding command of the English language shows. Second, she has enough to eat. Rwanda has achieved food security as of 2009 and continues to work to increase the amount of protein in diets of children like this little girl. And she is claiming her right to a future and possibility. This child and those of her generation and those who will come after will be the ones who carry forward a legacy of opportunity, self-determination, and self-reliance. In this little girl's words, we also find the echo of President Kagame's words when he said, and I quote, "What is always on my mind is where we are going to be as a country and as a people in 10 or 20 years. The other thing I think about is how I am going to make sure that everybody contributes tomorrow and the day after, so that they are the ones to do it, and they are the ones to benefit. How do I make them realize what needs to be done and what is in their best interest?" Rwanda makes no secret of what needs to be done. Many goals must be advanced simultaneously. Each is interdependent on the other. There is no choosing among initiatives, education one year, health another. Everything is a priority. And of course, reconciliation and unification are inseparable from the national agenda, as are commemoration and memorial. Rwanda's challenges will be addressed by Rwandan solutions. Help from the outside is welcome, as long as it is in keeping with the agenda that Rwanda sets for itself. Rwanda must forge a future for itself while honoring its past, commemorating the victims, and sharing and honoring the stories of survivors. It is complex and it is emotional, but the resilience and spirit of the Rwandan people are strong pillars on which to stand. Today, you have heard powerful testimonies and presentations, and you've heard the very moving personal stories and discussions about the importance of memory, of who speaks for survivors, of the intentional denial of genocide against Tutsi, about gacaca and transitional justice in comparison to the UN tribunal. And throughout the day, we have heard so many voices, including Her Excellency Clotilde Mabaranga Gasarabwe. Next, we will hear from the Honorable James Kamonyo, Rwanda's ambassador to the United States, as well as Cynthia Okuta, the U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, before today's commemoration comes to a close. It is my privilege to be part of this today. I have been moved personally, and it is truly a joy and an honor. And we know that each voice that is raised here, in remembrance, in testimony, and with presentations, is raised on behalf of those who cannot speak and who no longer have a voice, but who are never, ever forgotten.